People always ask me why I refuse to go anywhere near abandoned houses. I usually laugh it off. I tell them they're unsafe, that old floors collapse, or that I've simply outgrown exploring creepy places. The truth is different. The truth is that I once spent 3 nights in a farmhouse that shouldn't have had anyone living inside it. Everything I'm about to tell you happened in October of 2019. At least, that's when it started. Whether you believe the rest is entirely up to you. I grew up in a tiny farming village in northern Pennsylvania. It wasn't the kind of place tourists ever visited. There was one gas station, one church, and fewer than 400 people scattered across miles of old roads and dying farmland. If someone sneezed on the east side of town, people on the west side heard about it before dinner. Everyone knew everyone, or at least they thought they did. My grandfather had owned 80 acres just outside the village before he passed away. Most of the land had been sold years earlier, but one property remained in our family, an old white farmhouse. Nobody had lived there since the early 1990s. The roof sagged. Most of the windows were broken. The porch leaned forward so badly it looked ready to collapse. Even from the road, the house felt wrong. Not haunted, not cursed, just wrong. As if the building itself wanted to be left alone. Growing up, my parents never let me near it. If your ball rolls into that yard, my father used to say, you leave the ball. I thought it was just another small town superstition. Until my grandfather died. While sorting through his belongings, I found a rusted key taped inside an old hunting journal. Underneath it was one sentence written in shaky handwriting. Never stay after sunset. I laughed. My uncle didn't. He saw the note and quietly took it from my hands. Throw that key away, he said. Why? Because some doors stay locked for a reason. That should have been the end of it. Instead, curiosity got the better of me. A week later, I drove out there alone. The gravel driveway had nearly disappeared beneath weeds. Branches scraped against my truck as I pulled closer. Everything around the farmhouse felt strangely silent. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed weaker there. The house looked exactly as I remembered, except somehow smaller, like something that had been shrinking for years. The front door stood slightly open. I was positive nobody lived there. Still, someone had swept the porch recently. The dust formed clean lines. No leaves, no cobwebs, nothing. I called out, "Hello." No answer. I stepped inside. The smell hit immediately. Old wood, mold, something damp, and underneath it all, a faint metallic smell, like rusty pipes or dried blood. The furniture remained exactly where my grandparents had left it decades ago. An old rocking chair, a cracked television, family photographs covered in dust. One thing stood out. Every single clock in the house had stopped at exactly 2:17. Kitchen clock, bedroom clock, hallway clock, even my grandfather's old pocket watch sitting on a shelf. 2:17. I thought it was odd, nothing more. At the time, the upstairs hallway creaked beneath every step. Most rooms were empty. One bedroom still had faded wallpaper covered with tiny blue flowers. Another contained nothing but a broken crib. The last room belonged to my grandfather. His hunting rifle cabinet stood empty. His dresser remained untouched. His bed was perfectly made, as though someone still expected him to come home. Then I noticed something strange. There was fresh mud on the wooden floor. Not a lot, just several footprints leading toward the closet. They were barefoot, adult-sized. I froze. There shouldn't have been anyone inside. I opened the closet. Nothing. Empty shelves. old blankets, dead moths, no hidden door, no person. Yet the muddy footprints stopped inside the closet. There weren't any leading back out. I stared for almost a minute before convincing myself I'd overlooked something. Old houses did strange things. Animals got inside. Rain leaked through roofs. There was always a logical explanation. I believed that. Back then, as evening approached, I decided to stay, mostly to prove my family wrong. I brought camping supplies into the living room. A lantern, sleeping bag, portable battery, enough food for 2 days while I inspected the property before putting it on the market. By 7 o'clock, the sun disappeared behind the trees. That's when the noises started. Not loud, subtle. A floorboard settling upstairs, the faint tapping of wood expanding in the cold, the occasional creak somewhere beyond the hallway, perfectly normal, until I heard footsteps. 3 of them, slow, measured, above me. I looked toward the ceiling. Silence. 5 minutes later, 3 more footsteps. Exactly the same. Pause. Step. Step, 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 nothing. I grabbed my flashlight and checked the second floor again. Every room remained empty. The muddy footprints inside my grandfather's closet had vanished. The floor was completely clean. At 9:43 p.m., my phone lost signal. That wasn't unusual. The property had terrible reception. What bothered me was the battery. It had been at 81%. Now it read 12. Without warning, I plugged it into my battery pack. Neither one worked. Both devices shut off instantly. Outside, something moved across the front yard. I only caught it for a second. A silhouette, tall, very thin, standing beside the old well, watching the house. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the front door. Nobody, just empty fields stretching into darkness. When I turned back toward the porch, the rocking chair was moving, slowly, back, forward, back, forward. I told myself the wind had caught it. Except the trees weren't moving anymore. The air had become completely still. Around midnight, I finally fell asleep. I don't know how long I stayed unconscious. Something woke me. Not a sound, a feeling, the unmistakable sensation that someone was standing inches away from my face. I opened my eyes. Darkness, complete darkness. The lantern had gone out. I reached for my flashlight. Before my hand touched it, someone whispered from the kitchen. "You came back." The voice belonged to an old man, soft, almost kind. I held my breath. Nothing. Then the whisper came again, closer this time. I told them not to let you come back. I grabbed the flashlight and switched it on. The kitchen was empty. Every chair remained exactly where I'd left it. The whispering stopped. For nearly 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then, knock, knock, knock. 3 slow knocks, not on the front door, not on a wall, from directly beneath the floor. Someone or something was knocking from underneath the house, and it wanted me to answer.
For almost a full minute, I couldn't move. The knocking came again. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Knock. A pause. Knock. Another pause. Knock. It wasn't loud. It sounded as though someone was using their knuckles against thick wood, directly beneath the living room floor. I remember looking around the room, trying to convince myself it was an animal. A raccoon, a possum, maybe even loose pipes shifting in the cold. But there were no pipes beneath that section of the house. My grandfather had built the place himself in the 1950s. Instead of a full basement, the farmhouse sat on a shallow crawl space no higher than 3 feet. You couldn't stand underneath it. You had to crawl, and the only entrance was a rusted hatch outside near the back porch. The knocking continued, always in groups of 3. Never faster, never slower, almost patient. Like whoever was beneath me knew I was listening. Every instinct told me to leave. Instead, I made the worst decision of my life. I grabbed the flashlight, pulled on my boots, walked outside. The October air had turned bitter cold. The trees surrounding the property stood perfectly still against a moonless sky. No crickets, no frogs, no wind. The silence felt unnatural, as though the entire world had stopped breathing. I walked around the side of the house toward the crawl space entrance. The hatch was exactly where I remembered, half buried beneath weeds, covered in rust. A heavy chain wrapped around the handle. The padlock looked ancient. I pulled on it, still locked, still untouched. The knocking stopped. Not faded, stopped. Instantly. I waited, nothing. I crouched beside the hatch and listened. Silence. Then, something scraped slowly across the underside of the wooden floor above me. Not scratching, dragging, like someone pulling the back of their hand across old timber. I backed away immediately. The sound followed me, moving beneath the house, keeping pace with every step I took. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every hour, the same pattern repeated. 3 knocks, silence, a slow scraping sound, then complete stillness. At exactly 2:17 a.m., everything stopped. Every sound, even the distant hum of insects, returned. I remember checking my watch, 2:17, the same time every clock in the farmhouse had frozen. That was the first moment I considered leaving. Instead, morning arrived. And daylight has a funny way of making terrifying things seem ridiculous. By breakfast, I had convinced myself exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Around noon, I drove into the village for supplies. The cashier at the general store recognized me immediately. "You're Harold's grandson," I smiled. "Yeah. You fixing up the old place?" "I might." The woman's smile disappeared. She leaned forward. "You staying there?" I nodded. Her face turned pale. "Don't." Before I could ask why, an older man standing near the coffee machine interrupted. "He's already spent the night." The woman looked at me. "Did you hear it?" I felt my stomach tighten. "Hear what?" Neither of them answered. Instead, the old man quietly asked, "Did it knock?" I didn't respond. The silence told him everything. He sighed. I was hoping it had finally stopped. People in small towns don't usually like talking to strangers, but they love talking about old stories, especially the ones they pretend not to believe. The old man introduced himself as Walter, 83 years old, born in the village, never left. He invited me to sit outside the store. For the next hour, he told me something I'd never heard from anyone in my family. According to Walter, the farmhouse had another owner before my grandfather bought it, a widower named Elias Mercer. Nobody knew much about him. He kept to himself, never attended church, never joined community events. Children claimed they saw him wandering his fields after midnight carrying an old lantern. Adults dismissed the stories. Until one winter morning in 1948, a delivery driver arrived with supplies. The front door stood open. The stove was still burning. Dinner sat untouched on the table. But Elias Mercer had vanished. No footprints, no blood, no signs of struggle. The sheriff searched the woods for nearly 2 weeks. Nothing. It was as though the man had simply stopped existing. The house remained empty for years. Families tried moving in. None stayed longer than a month. Most left within days, always for different reasons. One complained about footsteps upstairs. Another claimed someone watched them through the bedroom window every night. One family insisted there was an old man living beneath the floor. No one believed them, until the youngest daughter disappeared. She was found the following afternoon, standing barefoot in the middle of Hollow Creek, nearly 2 miles from the house. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, wouldn't look at anyone. 3 weeks later, her parents packed everything they owned and left the county forever. Walter looked me straight in the eyes, You know what she finally said? I shook my head. He swallowed. She kept repeating one sentence. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. The man under the house doesn't like sunlight. I laughed, not because it was funny,
Because I didn't know what else to do.
Walter didn't laugh. Instead, he reached into his wallet. Inside was an old newspaper clipping, folded almost beyond recognition. The headline read, "Local farm sold after fourth family leaves property." The article mentioned complaints of unexplained noises, missing livestock, disturbed sleep, neighbors hearing voices after midnight. Near the bottom, one sentence had been circled in red ink decades ago. Several residents independently reported hearing knocking beneath the farmhouse shortly before dawn. I looked up. Is this real? Walter nodded. My father kept it. What happened after my grandfather moved in? Walter stared toward the road. He never stayed overnight. I frowned. What? He worked there every day. Walter paused, but every evening he drove back into town before sunset. That made no sense. My grandfather always told us he had lived in that house for years. The family photographs proved it, didn't they? I drove back to the property with more questions than answers. The closer I got, the heavier my chest felt. The farmhouse stood exactly as I'd left it. Except, the front door was closed. I knew I had left it open. I was certain. The muddy tire tracks from my truck were still fresh in the driveway. No other vehicles, no footprints, no signs anyone had visited. Yet someone, or something, had closed the door. Inside, the air smelled different. Not mold, not damp wood, fresh coffee. I stopped breathing. The smell was unmistakable. Someone had brewed coffee within the last hour. I slowly walked into the kitchen. The old coffee pot sat on the stove. Cold, dry, disconnected. It hadn't worked in decades. Yet the smell lingered, strong enough to make my eyes water. Then I noticed the table. A thin layer of dust covered everything, except one chair. Someone had recently sat there. Across from the chair, lying in the middle of the table, was something I had never seen before. An old photograph, black and white. The farmhouse, taken sometime in the 1950s. A man stood on the porch, tall, thin, wearing dark overalls. His face was impossible to make out. Someone had scratched it away with a knife. On the back, written in faded pencil, were 6 words. He never left, he just moved below. As I read them, 3 slow knocks echoed beneath my feet once again, only this time, they weren't coming from under the living room. They were coming from directly beneath the kitchen, and whatever was underneath had followed me. I wish I could tell you I left after that. I should have. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get in my truck, drive back to town, and never return. Instead, I stared at the photograph, then at the floor, then back at the photograph. The knocking came again. 3 slow taps, closer than before, not random, not echoing. It sounded as if someone had crawled directly beneath the kitchen and was knocking on the exact plank where I stood. I stepped backward. I took one cautious step forward. 3 knocks. It reacted to my movement. Whatever was under the house knew exactly where I was. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I heard another sound. A voice, not beneath me, behind me. So, I spun around so fast that I nearly fell over. No one. The kitchen was empty. The windows reflected only the dim afternoon light. Then the voice came again. So you finally came back. It wasn't loud. It sounded like an old man speaking from another room. I searched every room on the first floor. Nothing. The upstairs. Nothing. The attic. Empty. When I returned to the kitchen, the photograph was gone. I searched the table, the counters, the floor. Nothing. It had simply disappeared. By late afternoon, clouds rolled over the valley. Rain began falling in heavy sheets, drumming against the tin roof. I told myself I would leave, as soon as the storm passed. That was another lie. Part of me had become obsessed. The stories, the newspaper, the photograph. None of it made sense. If someone had been living beneath the farmhouse, there had to be evidence. There had to be an explanation. I grabbed a crowbar from my truck and walked around to the crawlspace hatch. The rusted chain was still wrapped around it. The old padlock looked untouched. I slipped the crowbar through the chain and pulled. Nothing. I pulled harder. With a loud metallic crack, the chain snapped. The padlock hit the ground. For a second, I just stood there, staring at the hatch. Something about opening it felt wrong. Not dangerous. Forbidden. As if the house itself didn't want me looking underneath. The wooden hatch groaned as I lifted it. A wave of icy air rolled out. It was at least 20 degrees colder beneath the house than outside. The smell hit next. Wet earth, rotting wood, and something else. A smell I recognized immediately from my years' work in construction. Decay. Not fresh. Old. Deep. Like something had been trapped underground for decades. I aimed my flashlight into the darkness. The crawl space stretched farther than I expected. Rows of thick support beams disappeared into blackness. Spider webs hung between them like curtains. Nothing moved. No animals. No insects. No sound. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Then I crawled inside. The first few feet were easy. The ground was dry, packed dirt, old stones, broken bricks. Every movement echoed through the wooden beams above me. After about 15 feet, the flashlight caught something strange. Scratches. Long parallel grooves carved into the support posts. Hundreds of them. Some fresh, some so old they had nearly disappeared. They weren't random. They all pointed deeper beneath the house, as if something had been dragged, again and again for years. Another 10 feet, the air grew colder. My flashlight flickered. I checked the batteries. Still nearly full. Yet the beam kept dimming, then brightening, then dimming again. I heard breathing, very faint, slow, steady, not mine. I froze. The breathing stopped. I held perfectly still, nothing. I convinced myself it had been my imagination. Then I crawled forward again. Immediately, the breathing resumed, always matching my movements. Never getting louder, never getting quieter, just following.
I reached the center of the crawl space. The flashlight illuminated something buried in the dirt. A child's shoe. Old leather, half rotten. I brushed away more soil. Another shoe. A rusted toy truck. A cracked porcelain doll's face. None of them belonged there. Someone had buried them deliberately. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I wanted to leave. Instead, I kept digging. Only a few inches beneath the dirt, my hand struck wood. A small box, wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were dozens of photographs. Every single one showed the farmhouse. Different years, different families, standing on the porch, smiling. The same house, the same front steps, the same background. But one thing never changed. In every photograph, there was someone standing in an upstairs window, watching. At first, I thought it was another family member. Then I noticed something impossible. The figure wore the exact same dark overalls in every picture, the same height, the same posture, the same silhouette. It never aged, and no one in the photograph seemed to notice it. A loud thump echoed above me. I looked up instinctively. Another thump. Footsteps. Someone was walking across the kitchen floor. I listened carefully. One step. Pause. Another step. Very slow. Heavy. Deliberate. I was alone. I knew I was alone. Yet someone was upstairs, walking through the farmhouse. Then I heard the front door open. It creaked exactly the way it always had. A few seconds later, it slammed shut. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Complete silence. I whispered, "Hello." No answer. Then dirt trickled from the beams above. Something had stepped directly over my head. I started crawling back as fast as I could. My elbows dug into the dirt. The flashlight bounced wildly. Behind me, something moved. Not loudly, just enough to hear soil shifting, as if another person had begun crawling too, keeping exactly the same pace. I stopped. The sound stopped. I crawled. It crawled. Faster. So did it. I swung the flashlight behind me. Nothing. Only darkness stretching beneath the house. Then the beam landed on the dirt. Fresh handprints, human handprints, appearing one after another, pressing into the soil, as if invisible hands were crawling toward me. I didn't wait to see more. I scrambled toward the hatch. The opening looked impossibly far away. Every second felt slower than the last. Behind me, the invisible crawling grew faster, closer, closer. Then a voice whispered only inches from my ear. "Don't leave me alone again." I screamed. I lunged through the hatch, slammed it shut, and rolled across the wet grass, gasping for air. Rain poured down around me. For several seconds, I simply lay there. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The broken chain, the one I had snapped with the crowbar, was wrapped neatly around the hatch again. The padlock hung from it, locked, as if it had never been opened. I stared at it in disbelief. There was only one explanation. Someone had locked it while I was still underneath the house.
I don't remember getting back inside the farmhouse. One moment I was kneeling in the mud, staring at the locked hatch. The next, I was standing in the kitchen, soaked from head to toe. The rain hammered against the windows. Water dripped from my jacket onto the warped wooden floor. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold the flashlight. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Shock? Adrenaline? Maybe I had imagined the chain. Maybe I'd never broken it in the first place. The problem was, the crowbar was still lying beside the hatch, bent almost in half. I decided to leave immediately. I grabbed my backpack, my truck keys, my phone. I walked straight to the front door. The handle wouldn't turn. I frowned and pulled harder. Nothing. The old latch hadn't jammed. It felt as though someone on the other side was holding the door shut. I threw my shoulder into it. The entire frame shook. I rushed to the back entrance. Locked. The side entrance. Locked. Every window refused to open. The warped frames might as well have been sealed with concrete. My truck sat less than 50 yards away. I could see it through the rain, yet I couldn't reach it. Then the lights came on. Not electric lights. The house hadn't had power for years. Oil lamps, one after another. The lamp in the hallway, the one above the fireplace, the small lantern in the kitchen. Yellow flames flickered to life without anyone touching them. The farmhouse slowly filled with warm light. For one impossible moment, it no longer looked abandoned. The wallpaper looked new. The furniture looked polished. The cracked ceiling appeared freshly painted. The smell of mold disappeared. Instead, I smelled fresh bread, wood smoke, coffee. The house looked alive, as if I had stepped backward in time. Voices drifted through the hallway. Soft conversation. A woman laughing. Someone setting plates on a table. Children running upstairs. I stood frozen. The sounds felt completely normal, like any ordinary family evening. Then, I heard a man speak. "Has Elias come by today?" The room fell silent. Another voice answered quietly. "No." A long pause. "Good." The warmth vanished instantly. The lamps went dark. The laughter stopped. The smell of fresh bread disappeared. The farmhouse became old again, rotting, cold, silent. I don't know how long I stood there before I noticed the photograph hanging above the fireplace. I had walked past that wall dozens of times. It had always been empty. Now there was a framed family portrait. A husband, a wife, 3 children, standing on the porch. The date written beneath it read, October 12th, 1954. The father smiled proudly into the camera. The children looked excited. Only the mother seemed uncomfortable. She wasn't looking at the photographer. She was looking toward the upstairs window. Fear filled her face. I stepped closer. My flashlight illuminated the glass. There he was, the same tall silhouette, watching from behind the curtains. The photographer hadn't noticed. Neither had the family, except the mother. She had seen him. Something tapped gently against the picture frame. 3 taps, from inside the wall. I backed away. The tapping spread, not just behind the photograph, behind every wall. The entire farmhouse answered at once. Knock. Silence. Knock. Silence. Knock. Hundreds of knocks echoed through the walls. Beneath the floor, above the ceiling. Not loud, just enough to make the wood vibrate. It sounded as though the house itself was full of people politely asking to be let out. I covered my ears. It didn't help. The knocking wasn't only something I heard. I could feel it. The floor trembled beneath my boots. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The old rocking chair on the porch began moving again. Back, forward, back, forward. Then every sound stopped at once. Complete silence. The kind of silence that hurts your ears. And into that silence, someone spoke from directly behind me. You shouldn't have opened it. The voice was calm, old, tired. I turned slowly. An elderly man stood at the end of the hallway. He wore faded overalls. Mud covered his bare feet. His face looked strangely ordinary, not rotting, not ghostly, just pale. His eyes, however, were completely black. Not dark brown, not shadowed, black, like empty holes cut into his face. He watched me with quiet disappointment. You broke the chain. I couldn't answer. You weren't supposed to. His voice never changed. It sounded like someone discussing the weather. You let them hear you. I stumbled backward until my shoulders hit the kitchen wall. Who are you? The old man tilted his head. For several seconds, he simply stared. Then he smiled. It wasn't threatening. It was sad. My name doesn't matter anymore. They stopped saying it. He took one slow step forward. The house remembers. Another step. The village remembers. One more. But people forget. His eyes never left mine. That's how I stay. I blinked. For less than a second. When I opened my eyes again, he was standing only a few feet away. I hadn't seen him move. His face filled the flashlight beam. Every wrinkle, every raindrop on his clothes, every thread in his faded overalls. He smelled of wet earth and old wood. Then he whispered the sentence that still wakes me up at night. I've been waiting for someone from your family. My blood turned to ice. Your grandfather promised. He smiled wider. That one of you would come back. Before I could react, a deafening crash exploded upstairs. It sounded like every bedroom door had slammed shut at exactly the same moment. Then came running footsteps. Not one person. Many. Children. Adults. Heavy boots. Bare feet. They raced across the second floor from one end of the house to the other. The ceiling shook violently. The old man never looked up. He simply continued staring at me, listening, waiting. Then, one by one, the footsteps stopped, directly above the kitchen. Hundreds of floorboards groaned together, as though dozens of people were standing shoulder to shoulder, looking down at us through the ceiling. The old man finally spoke again. They know you're here. Every voice upstairs whispered my name at exactly the same time. Not shouted, not screamed, whispered. Like a congregation finishing a prayer. That was the moment I realized something I should have understood from the beginning. The thing haunting the farmhouse wasn't trapped beneath it. It had only been calling from below. The others had been inside the house all along.
For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. The whispers faded as quickly as they had begun. Then the house became silent again. The old man was still standing in front of me, watching, waiting. His expression never changed. "I don't understand," I managed to whisper. "You will." Those were the last words he spoke. The kitchen lights flickered. Not electric light, the impossible glow of the oil lamps. One sharp flash, then darkness. I instinctively raised my flashlight. The hallway was empty. The old man had vanished. There were no footsteps, no creaking floorboards, no closing doors. It was as if he had never existed, except the kitchen floor was covered in wet footprints, bare feet, leading toward the staircase. Every survival instinct screamed at me not to follow them. I followed them anyway. One step at a time, I climbed the stairs. The house groaned beneath my weight. Halfway up, I noticed something strange. The footprints stopped, not faded, stopped. On the 7th stair, there were no prints above it, no prints below. Just one final muddy footprint, pointing toward the hallway. I reached the 2nd floor. Every bedroom door stood open. Every room was empty, but the air felt different, heavier, like walking into a crowded room after everyone had suddenly gone quiet. Then I heard paper rustling, a soft, steady sound from my grandfather's bedroom. The room looked exactly as it had the day before. The neatly made bed, the old wardrobe, the cracked mirror. So, only one thing had changed. The wallpaper behind the dresser had peeled away, just enough to reveal a narrow opening in the wall. I was certain it hadn't been there before. I pulled the heavy dresser aside. Behind it was a small cavity between the wooden studs. Inside lay an old leather journal wrapped in oilcloth, and beside it, a revolver, 6 chambers, all loaded. The metal was clean, recently cleaned. Impossible. No one had lived here for decades. The journal belonged to my grandfather. His name was written inside the cover. The first entries were ordinary. Repairs, weather, crop prices. Then, several pages later, everything changed. April 3, knocking started again. April 9, only after sunset. April 15, it knows my voice now. My hands began shaking. I kept reading. May 2nd, Walter told me never to answer it. Walter, the old man from the general store. He knew. He had always known. Another page. May 18, it doesn't want into the house. It wants someone to invite it. I frowned. That didn't make sense. The thing beneath the house had already spoken. It had followed me, hadn't it? I kept reading. June 1, the knocking is only bait. Never answer. Never knock back. A chill crawled down my spine. Without thinking, I remembered what I had done the night before. When the knocking first started beneath the living room floor, I had tapped my flashlight against the wood 3 times. Not hard, just absent-mindedly. Answering the rhythm, 3 taps, my stomach dropped. I had answered. The next page had been written much later. The handwriting had become shaky, uneven, as if my grandfather's hands wouldn't stop trembling. October 11. It came inside tonight. I stopped reading. The room suddenly felt much colder. I looked toward the bedroom door. Still empty, still silent. I turned back to the journal. October 12th. It isn't pretending anymore. It wears faces now. Another page. If anyone from my family ever finds this, leave. Do not search. Do not stay until dark. And whatever you do, if someone who looks like me asks you to open a door, run. A loud creak echoed from downstairs. Someone had entered the farmhouse. The front door opened, then closed. Slow footsteps crossed the hallway below. I froze. Maybe it was Walter. Maybe someone from town had come looking for me. I rushed to the bedroom window. My truck still sat outside. Only one set of tire tracks. No other vehicles. No one could have arrived. Yet the footsteps continued, slow, measured, crossing the living room, stopping beneath the staircase. Then, a familiar voice called upward. Hey, it was my grandfather, exactly as I remembered him. Warm, calm, gentle. Come downstairs. My entire body went numb. He had been dead for almost 8 years. The voice came again. I'm waiting. I couldn't move. Part of me wanted to believe it, wanted to hear his voice again, wanted to see him. Then I remembered the journal. If someone who looks like me asks you to open a door, run. The footsteps began climbing the stairs. 1. At a time. Each step louder than the last. The old wooden staircase groaned under an impossible weight. Step, creak, step, creak, step, creak. The footsteps stopped outside the bedroom. The door was still open. No one stood there, yet my grandfather's voice came from the empty hallway. You've gotten so tall. A long silence followed. Then, in a softer voice, I've missed you. Something inside me almost broke. For one terrifying moment, I wanted to walk out into the hallway. I wanted to believe. Then I noticed the mirror. The bedroom mirror reflected part of the hallway. And in that reflection, someone was standing just outside the doorway. Tall, thin, barefoot, wearing dark overalls, smiling. But when I looked directly at the hallway, there was nothing there, only empty air. The voice whispered one last time, please. Another pause. Open the door. The bedroom door, which had been standing fully open only seconds earlier, slowly began to swing shut on its own. And I realized with growing horror, it wasn't trying to get in. It was trying to lock me inside.
The bedroom door closed with a soft click. Not a slam, not a bang, just a quiet, deliberate click. The kind you hear when someone carefully shuts a door behind them. I rushed toward it and grabbed the handle. Locked. I twisted it harder. Nothing. The old brass handle wouldn't move. My breathing became ragged. The windows. I still had the windows. I ran across the room and threw my shoulder against the nearest one. The ancient glass shattered instantly. Cold rain blasted into the room. Without thinking, I climbed onto the windowsill. The drop wasn't far, maybe 12 feet. I could survive that. I swung one leg outside. Then something grabbed my ankle. Not tightly, not violently, just enough to stop me. I looked down. Nothing. My boot was suspended in midair, as if invisible fingers were wrapped gently around it. The grip tightened, slowly, patiently. I yanked backward with everything I had. The pressure vanished. I fell onto the bedroom floor, hitting my shoulder hard enough to knock the flashlight from my hand. It rolled beneath the bed. The room went dark. At first I heard only the rain. Then, someone crawled underneath the bed. The sound was unmistakable. Fabric brushing wood. Elbows dragging across old floorboards. Slow breathing. Only inches beneath me. I didn't move. I couldn't. The crawling stopped directly under where I was sitting. A low voice whispered through the mattress. He's lying. It wasn't the old man. It wasn't my grandfather. It sounded like a woman. Very old, very tired. You still have time. A pause. Don't believe him. Then complete silence. My flashlight suddenly flickered back to life beneath the bed. Its beam shone toward the opposite wall. I leaned down just enough to look underneath. There was no one there. Only the flashlight, dust, and something carved into the underside of the bed frame. 3 words. Don't look back. Deep. Someone had made it years earlier with a pocket knife. Maybe decades. I retrieved the flashlight with trembling hands. As I stood up, The bedroom door unlocked by itself. The handle turned. Slowly, the door drifted open. The hallway beyond was empty. But I knew something had changed. The house no longer felt like it was trying to scare me. It felt like it was moving me, guiding me, leading me somewhere. The journal was still clutched in my left hand. I continued reading as I stepped into the hallway. Near the final pages, my grandfather's handwriting became almost unreadable. Ink streaked across the paper. Whole sentences had been crossed out. Then one entry caught my eye. November 2nd. I finally know why it waits. Nothing else on the page. The next page answered the question. Every generation, it chooses someone from the family that owns the house. Not to kill, to replace. I stopped walking. Replace? It cannot leave. Not completely. Someone has to stay. A chill swept through me. I suddenly understood the photograph. The families. The disappearances. The old man. It had never been hunting strangers. It had been waiting for heirs. Waiting for blood. Waiting for someone connected to the house. Someone like me. A loud knock echoed from downstairs. Not beneath the floor. At the front door. 3 slow knocks. Someone was outside. I walked to the upstairs window. A sheriff's cruiser sat in the driveway. Relief flooded through me. Walter must have called them. A deputy stood on the porch in the rain. He knocked again, then looked directly up at me. I waved frantically. He smiled. Then my blood froze. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at someone standing beside me. I slowly turned. The hallway behind me was empty. When I looked back outside, the deputy was gone. So was the cruiser. The driveway was empty again. Only rain, only silence. The journal slipped from my hands. It landed open on the last written page. There was only one sentence, written in heavy black ink. If you're reading this after dark, I'm sorry. Below the sentence, someone else had written something. Different handwriting. Fresh. The ink was still wet. It hadn't been there seconds earlier. It read, "Too late." The house groaned. Every wall shuddered. Somewhere below, wood cracked with a deafening snap. Then came the sound I had feared more than anything else. Children laughing. Not happily, not playfully. Soft, empty, as if they had forgotten what laughter was supposed to sound like. One voice whispered from the downstairs hallway. "He's ready." Another answered. So was the last one. Then dozens more voices joined together. "Bring him." The floor beneath my feet vibrated. Dust rained from the ceiling. The journal slammed shut by itself. A deep, resonating thud echoed through the farmhouse. Not from below, not from above. From inside the walls. The entire house seemed to inhale. For the first time since I arrived, I understood the truth. The farmhouse wasn't haunted. It wasn't possessed. The house itself was alive, and every person who had ever disappeared inside it was still part of it. Their voices in the walls, their footsteps in the halls, their whispers beneath the floors. They hadn't died. They had been absorbed. The house remembered every single one, and now it was making room for one more. At the far end of the hallway, the old man in the overalls appeared once again. He wasn't alone this time. Behind him stood dozens of silent figures. Men, women, children. All pale, all barefoot, all staring at me without blinking. None of them looked angry. None of them looked violent. They looked relieved. As if my arrival meant they were finally allowed to rest. The old man raised one trembling hand toward me. His black eyes met mine, and for the first time, emotion appeared on his face. Not hatred, not hunger, guilt. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "They chose you." Then every figure behind him took one synchronized step forward, and the hallway went completely dark. Darkness swallowed everything. Not the ordinary darkness of a room with the lights turned off. This was different. The beam from my flashlight disappeared only a few feet in front of me, as though the darkness itself were solid. I couldn't even see the walls anymore. Only the old man. He remained perfectly visible. standing 20 feet away. Waiting, the figures behind him slowly faded into the black, until only their eyes remained. Hundreds of pale eyes, watching. Then, the old man spoke. "You still have a choice." His voice echoed strangely, as if the house were repeating every word a second later. "You can leave." Hope surged through me, but the word lingered in the darkness. "Someone else will have to stay." For several seconds, neither of us moved. I forced myself to ask the question that had haunted me since the first night. "Who are you?" The old man lowered his head. "My name," he smiled sadly. "I don't remember anymore." "You said my grandfather promised you something." "He did." "What promise?" The old man's expression filled with regret. "He promised that his family would never come back." I frowned. "But I did." "Yes." He looked at me with something close to pity. "And promises matter here." The hallway shifted. Without warning, the walls stretched farther apart. The ceiling rose higher. The farmhouse became impossibly large. The wallpaper peeled away in long strips, revealing rough timber beneath. Only it wasn't timber. It was bone. Hundreds of pale yellowed bones woven together inside the walls like the ribs of some enormous animal. Human hands protruded between them, frozen forever in the wood, some reaching outward, some desperately clawing inward. I stumbled backward. The floor flexed beneath my boots, not creaked, flexed, like muscle beneath skin. The house was breathing, slowly, steadily, patiently. "I don't understand." "You don't have to." The old man took another step. "The house was built long after it was born." "What does that mean?" "It was never the wood." He looked around at the walls. "People only built around it." A low groan echoed beneath us. The entire structure shivered. "The house doesn't trap people." Another pause. "It remembers them." A scream erupted somewhere upstairs. Not fear, agony. Then another. Then dozens. Voices overlapping until they became impossible to separate. I covered my ears. The old man didn't react. They remember becoming part of it. His eyes met mine. They never forget that moment. Then I saw her. Among the silent figures behind him stood a little girl, 8 or 9 years old, wearing a faded yellow raincoat. She looked different from the others. Not empty, not resigned, terrified. She stared directly at me. Slowly, without making a sound, she shook her head. "No." Then she mouthed 2 words. "Wake up." Before I could react, the old man stepped in front of her. She disappeared. Something crashed downstairs. Glass shattered. The front door flew open. For the first time since arriving, cold night air rushed into the house. The old man looked toward the entrance. His expression changed instantly. Fear. Real fear. "They opened it." "Who?" He didn't answer. Instead, every figure in the hallway turned toward the stairs, listening. Outside, engines roared. Voices shouted. Flashlights swept across the front windows. Someone yelled my name. Not whispered. Actually yelled it. "Daniel." "Walter." I recognized his voice immediately. They found me. I started toward the staircase. The old man didn't stop me. Instead, he quietly said, "Don't let them come inside." I ran. The hallway seemed endless. Every step felt slower than the last. Behind me, hundreds of footsteps began following. Not running, walking, perfectly synchronized. Step, step, step. Like an army moving through the darkness. I reached the staircase. Walter stood in the open doorway with 3 other men from the village. Each carried a flashlight.
None of them crossed the threshold. Walter looked 20 years older than he had that morning. "There you are. Don't come in," I shouted. He nodded immediately, almost as if he'd expected those exact words. Instead, he reached into his pocket and threw something across the floor. My grandfather's key. The old rusted key I'd found taped inside the journal. It slid to my feet. Walter shouted, "Put it back." Back where? The front door. I stared at him. See what? The lock. Only then did I notice something impossible. The front door no longer had a normal lock. Set into the center of the wood was an ancient iron keyhole I had never seen before. It looked older than the house itself. The old man behind me sighed. So, he whispered. He remembered. The footsteps behind him stopped. Every silent figure stood perfectly still. Watching, waiting, I picked up the key. It was warm, almost hot. As I slid it into the keyhole, the entire farmhouse let out a deep, thunderous groan. Not a sound of anger, a sound of pain. The walls trembled violently. Cracks raced across the ceiling. The old man closed his eyes. It ends now. I turned the key. The click echoed through every room. Instantly, every voice inside the house screamed. Hundreds of voices, thousands, men, women, children, not in rage, in relief. The sound shook the windows. Pictures crashed from the walls. Floorboards split open beneath my feet. The old man smiled for the first time. A genuine smile. Thank you. Then he began to crumble. Not into dust, into dry earth. The silent figures behind him dissolved one by one, their faces softening as they vanished. The little girl in the yellow raincoat looked at me one last time. This time, she smiled. Then she too disappeared. The walls stopped breathing. The knocking ceased. The whispers were gone. The farmhouse fell completely silent. For the first time, it felt like an ordinary, empty building. Walter grabbed my arm and pulled me outside just as the roof collapsed behind us. The old farmhouse folded into itself with a deafening roar, sending sparks and dust into the stormy night. Within minutes, nothing remained except a pile of broken timber and a single stone chimney. The fire department later blamed rotten support beams weakened by years of neglect. That explanation satisfied everyone. Everyone except the 4 men who had stood on the porch that night. None of them ever spoke publicly about what they heard after I turned the key. But years later, Walter admitted one final detail to me. But the house collapsed. Every one of them heard hundreds of voices whisper the exact same sentence. We're finally going home. Walter died 6 months later. Before he passed away, he mailed me my grandfather's journal. Inside was a folded note that I had somehow missed. Only one sentence had been written on it. If the house ever falls, never build there again. Last autumn, curiosity got the better of me. I drove back to Hollow Creek. The land had already been sold. Construction crews were pouring a new foundation. I stopped my truck and watched from across the road. One of the workers walked over to another and pointed toward the ground. Even from where I was standing, I could hear him laugh. Then he said something that made every hair on my body stand up. That's weird. He bent down and knocked 3 times on the fresh concrete. A second later, 3 slow knocks answered from underneath. I never went back. People ask me sometimes why I never tell them the exact location of Hollow Creek. I usually smile and change the subject, because the truth is, it doesn't matter anymore. The farmhouse is gone. The road signs disappeared years ago. Even old county maps don't agree on where the property actually stood. It's as though the land itself has been quietly erased. At least, that's what I believed. Until last month. I work from home now. Quiet life, no children, no pets. Just me in a small house, several states away from the place where all of this happened. For years, nothing strange ever occurred. I almost convinced myself it had finally ended. Then an envelope arrived. No return address, no postage stamp, just my name, written in handwriting I recognized immediately. My grandfather's. My hands started shaking before I even opened it. Inside was a single black and white photograph. No note, No explanation, just the picture. It showed my current house, the one I live in now. The photograph had clearly been taken from across the street. At night, one light was on upstairs, my bedroom window. I stared at it for several minutes before something caught my attention. There was someone standing behind the glass, watching the camera, watching whoever had taken the photograph, watching me.
The figure wore dark overalls. Its face had been scratched away, exactly like the old photograph I found in the farmhouse. I ran outside immediately. No footprints, no tire tracks, no one on the street. I called the police. They searched the neighborhood. Nothing. The officer suggested someone was playing a prank. I wanted to believe him. I really did. That night, I installed security cameras around every entrance, motion lights, new locks. I even bought a dog. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then, at exactly 2:17 in the morning, every camera stopped recording, not one after another, all at the same second. The dog began growling toward the crawl space beneath the house. He refused to go near it. The next morning, I reviewed what little footage remained. The final frame from the backyard camera lasted less than a second, long enough to capture a shadow kneeling beside the foundation. One pale hand rested against the concrete, as if someone were listening. I tried to zoom in. The image became grainy, but I could still make out one detail. The fingers were muddy, bare, human. That evening, I hired a contractor to inspect the crawl space. He was underneath the house for less than 3 minutes before crawling back out. His face had turned completely white. I asked him what was wrong. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he brushed dirt off his sleeves and asked a question he couldn't possibly have known to ask. Has anyone ever knocked from down there before? I didn't answer. He packed his tools without another word. When I asked if he was going to finish the inspection, he shook his head. Then he quietly said, "I've been doing this for 34 years. I've never heard concrete answer back." He left. He never sent me a bill. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2:17 a.m., I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Not on my front door, not on a wall, from somewhere beneath my bedroom floor. I remembered my grandfather's journal. I remembered Walter. I remembered the old man. Most of all, I remembered the one rule: never answer. So I lay perfectly still. The knocking came again. 3 slow taps, then silence. I thought it was over, until I heard a familiar voice beneath the floorboards. Soft, patient, almost kind. "You came back." I moved out the next morning. I never collected the rest of my furniture. The house was demolished 6 months later, after developing unexplained foundation problems. Last week, I drove past the empty lot. There isn't a house there anymore, just grass, fresh soil, and a small wooden sign warning people to keep away from unstable ground. Someone had scratched 3 words into the bottom of the sign. I recognized the handwriting. "We remember you." If you're listening to this while lying in bed, and your house has a crawl space beneath it, do yourself one favor. If you ever wake up at 2:17 in the morning and hear 3 slow knocks coming from below, whatever you do, don't answer.